Good morning. As I told you all last week, I am in-person testing today, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and I will not be having a live CC session. I am doing this asynchronous lesson for this week. Important dates that we need to remember. Unit test is overdue. It was due on Friday, February the 2nd. We're going to begin Unit 3 on factoring starting Monday, February the 5th. And looking ahead, the Unit 3 test is on February 23rd. Right, this is warm-up in terms of what we were doing before with distributive property. And I have gone through and shown each of the problems. On the first one, we are multiplying everything in the parentheses by the a outside, which means that we have a times 3a plus a times 7. We know that when we multiply variables, we must add the exponents. Therefore, a times a gives me 3a squared. And I multiply the numbers in front. This one is understood to be a 1 times 3, which is 3. So the first term would be 3a squared. I multiply the second, a times 7, which is 7a. All right, on the second example, we are multiplying negative 2m times this trinomial inside the parentheses. I must distribute and multiply each term by negative 2m. Therefore, I wrote it out, negative 2m times m squared plus negative 2m times 6m plus negative 2m times negative 1. Multiplying variables, we are going to add these degrees. So I have 2 times 1, negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. M to the first times m squared gives me m to the third power. Second term, negative 2 times 6 is negative 12, so this would become minus 12. And I'm multiplying m times m, which means I'm adding those degrees to get m squared. The third term is negative 2m times negative 1. I multiply negative 2 times negative 1, which gives me positive 2m. On the last example, I'm multiplying this parentheses by 4x cubed y times x squared minus 2y. I multiply 4x cubed y times x squared plus 4x cubed y times negative 2y. Simplify the first product. I have 4 times 1, which is going to be 4. X cubed plus x squared. I add those exponents to get x to the 5th, and I bring down my y term. Second term, I'm multiplying 4 times negative 2, which is negative 8, so this would be minus 8. X cubed, there's not another x term, so I bring it down. And y times y, which means that I'm adding those two exponents to get y squared. Okay, this is an example of what you do when you simplify. You are multiplying using distributive property. All right, what is factoring? Factoring is when you can take a number, you can take a polynomial, and you can write it as 2 or more factors. So simplest form would be 2a plus 4. The reason that is in simplest form is because there are no like terms and we cannot combine them together. Factored form would be written for this problem as 2 times a plus 2, because what happens when I multiply that parentheses by 2? I would have 2 times a plus 2 times 2, which is going to be 2a plus 4. The exact same thing that we started with. So simplest form means that there are no like terms and nothing can be combined together. Factored form means that we are going to write this as multiplication. Polynomials that cannot be factored are called prime. All right, the first kind of factoring that we're going to work on is going to be called the greatest common factor. And you may remember from previous years that you might have found the greatest common factors by doing factor trees in which you had nothing but prime numbers and circling what was in common. Okay, we are not going to do that. We are going to find the GCF on Desmos. And to find the GCF, all we're going to do is we're going to type in lowercase letters, GCF, in parentheses, you're going to put the numbers in that problem. For instance, if I had 2x squared plus 4x, and I'm asked to find the GCF, I would type into Desmos GCF of 2, 4. And that would tell me that that is 2. Not only can you have the GCF of numbers, you can also have the GCF of variables. And we will look at problems in which we have a GCF dealing with variables. All right, on the first example, it asks for us to factor out the GCF. So what I did on problem number 1, I took the two numbers, the coefficients, and I typed it into Desmos as the GCF parentheses 3, 12, and it told me that the GCF was 3. All right, so I know in this particular problem that my GCF is equal to 3. Now, what do I do once I find the GCF? Once I find the GCF, I'm going to take my original problem. I'm going to divide each term by the GCF, and I'm going to write my answer in distributive property form. That means I'm going to have my GCF outside the parentheses, and inside the parentheses, I'm going to get what is left once I do this division. So I have 3 divided by 3. Those cancel out and leave x. And I have 12 divided by 3, which is 4. Therefore, factored, 3x plus 12 becomes 3 times x plus 4. We can check this using distributive property. And that would mean that we would be multiplying everything inside by 3. So I would have 3 times x plus 3 times 4. And that would give me 3x plus 12. So my answer for number 1 is the GCF times x plus 4. All right, problem number 2. All right, I type into the calculator lowercase GCF in parentheses 7, 7, and it tells me that the GCF is 7. So I know in this particular problem that my GCF is 7. I'm going to do exactly the same thing I did before. I'm going to take the original problem. I'm going to divide it by 7. And my answer is going to be the GCF, which is what's on the bottom, outside of parentheses. And inside the parentheses, we are going to simplify and divide each term by 7. 7 divided by 7 is y. That is just 1y. Minus 7 divided by 7 is 1. So my answer on this one would be 7 times y minus 1. I can check And again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to distribute 7 times y minus 7 times 1, which would give me my original problem. All right, problem number 3. All right, I type into Desmos the GCF of 8 and 36, and I find that that is equal to 4. Therefore, on problem number 3, my GCF is 4. To get my answer, I'm going to take my original problem, and I'm going to divide each term by the GCF. And my answer is going to be the GCF, which is 4, times the parentheses. To get what goes inside, I'm going to do 8 divided by 4, which is 2, and I bring the m down, plus 36 divided by 4 is 9, and I bring the n down. Therefore, 4 times 2m plus 9n would be my answer. And again, on that one, we can check by distributive. All right, problem number 4, I type in the GCF of the numbers 5 and 30, and I get 5 as my GCF. So I'm going to write that GCF down. And I'm going to take my original problem, and I'm going to divide it by my GCF. The 5's divide to equal 1, and we know 1x is just x, plus 30 divided by 5 is 6, and I bring down the y. So we have taken polynomials that were in simplest form, and we have factored out the GCF. All right, on the first problem, problem number 5, we are finding the GCF of this binomial 15a squared b minus 30ab. I typed into Desmos the GCF of 15 and 30, and I find that the number part is going to be 15. Now, to do the variables, listen carefully. We have a squared, and we have a to the first power. The GCF of variables is going to be the smallest degree of that variable. Therefore, since 1 is smaller, I'm going to put a to the first power in my GCF. I also have the variable b in both terms. I have a b to the first, and I have a b to the first. Okay, which is smaller, 1 or 1? They're the same. When they're the same, that means you're going to put that degree as the GCF, and this would become 15AB. All right, what do we do with that? Exactly as we did before, we're going to divide each term by 15AB. My 15AB, which is my GCF, is going to go outside the parentheses, and I'm going to divide. 15 divided by 15 is 1. I have a squared on top and a to the first on the bottom. We know that when we divide monomials, we must subtract the exponent, and the variable goes with the largest degree. So that means I'm going to have an a to the first power on top. B's are the same. I have a b to the first and a b to the first. That means those are going to cancel out completely. So my first term is just a, or a to the first power. I'm going to subtract. 30 divided by 15 is 2. I have a to the first and a to the first on top and bottom. They cancel. B to the first and B to the first cancel. So my term, second term, is just minus 2. Now I could do the same thing and distribute to check this. Okay, problem number 6, we have 16bc to the second plus 24bc. I've typed into Desmos the GCF of 16 and 24 and found that that is 8. Therefore, I'm going to have the GCF of the numbers is 8. I'll look at my variables. I have b to the first and b to the first. Therefore, I pick the smallest degree of b, which is the same, so it's just going to be 1. And I have a c to the second and a c to the first. I pick the smallest degree of c, which is 1. So my GCF is 8bc. I'm going to divide each term by 8bc. In my answer, the GCF goes in front of the parentheses, and then I divide. 16 divided by 8 is 2. The b's are the same. I have b to the first and b to the first. They are going to cancel. My c's, the largest degree of c is on top, and I know to subtract. So 2 minus 1 would give me c to the first power. Plus 24 divided by 8 is 3. B to the first on top and on the bottom cancels. C on top, C on the bottom cancels. So my answer is 8bc times 2c plus 3. Okay, on the next example, we have AB minus A. There are no numbers, but they are understood to be ones. So when you type into Desmos, you find the GCF of 1 and 1, and it is 1. So the number part is 1. I have in the first term a to the first, in the second term a to the first. They are the same, therefore a to the first is going to go in my GCF. In the b's, I have b to the first in the first term, and I have none in the second term. Anytime there is none, then automatically there will be none in the GCF. So my GCF of this one is just plain 1A or A. I'm going to divide by A, and I put my GCF in front. A's are the same, top and bottom, therefore they are going to cancel out, and it leaves B. A's are the same, top and bottom, and they cancel out to leave 1. So my answer is A times B minus 1. Okay, on the next example, same as before, the first term does not have a number in front. It is understood to be a 1. So I typed into Desmos the GCF of 1 and 3, and it gave me 1. Therefore, my GCF is 1. I look now at my variables. I have x to the second and x to the first. Smallest degree of x goes in the GCF. I have y to the first and y to the first. Since those are the same, y to the first goes in the GCF. So my GCF in this case is xy. So I'm going to divide by xy. And if I want to put the 1 there, that is fine. So outside my parentheses, I'm going to have my GCF, which is 1xy, times 1 divided by 1 is 1. I have 2 x's on top, 1 on the bottom. I subtract to get x to the first. Y's are the same, they cancel. Plus 3 divided by 1 is 3. X's are the same, they cancel. Y's are the same, they cancel. So my answer is going to be xy times x plus 3. We'll go in front. All right, the next type of problem that we're going to factor is factoring trinomials. And a trinomial is a polynomial that has 3 terms. We have x squared plus bx plus c, and the number in front of x squared is going to be 1. These are the trinomials that we are going to factor. So what we do is, to factor a trinomial in this form, you must find 2 numbers that multiply together to equal the third number, but when you add them together, it equals that second number. So in the example that is given, you have x squared plus 7x plus 12. We are asking what 2 numbers multiplied equal 12. But when we add them, it equals 7. Well, the 2 factors of 12, we can multiply 1 times 12. We can multiply 2 times 6. We can multiply 3 times 4. And 3 times 4 is the correct choice of factors. So when we find those factors, we are then going to factor this trinomial. It is going to always be 2 parentheses. The first term is always going to be x and x, because x times x gives you x squared. To get the second terms, we use the 2 numbers that we found. Okay, this is a positive 3, therefore it is a plus 3. This is a positive 4, which is a plus 4. All right, let's look at a couple of trinomials. The first thing that you want to do on any problem that you factor is to find the GCF. And I'm going to type into Desmos the GCF of the 3 numbers. Even though n squared does not have a number in front of it, we have to put that 1 there because this is a trinomial. And that tells me that the GCF is 1. When I look at the variables, I have n squared, I have n to the first, and I have none. Therefore, none is going to be how many n's go in the GCF. When your GCF is 1, it is not necessary to do the division. So I'm going to now type into Desmos my trinomial, and when I type it in, you must always use x. So instead of n squared, I'm going to type it in as x squared plus 9x plus 20. And what I'm going to look for are going to be the x-intercepts, okay, the x-intercepts of the graph. I can see that my x-intercepts are -5 and -4. Okay, so my x-intercepts are -5 and -4. To get the numbers that go in the blanks, we are going to take the opposite of these 2 numbers. So the opposite of -5 is 5. The opposite of -4 is 4. And we're going to check to see if that works. 5 times 4 is 20. That's good. 5 plus 4 is 9. So the 2 numbers that I'm going to use to factor this trinomial are going to be positive 5 and positive 4. What we have to remember is that we have to do the opposite of those numbers. So when you get your x-intercept, you're going to type the opposite, and that will give you the 2 numbers that you're going to use to factor. So to factor this trinomial, my answer is going to be 2 parentheses one parentheses, both parentheses are going to contain an n and an n, because that's going to give me that first term. So I have n times n is n squared. Then I use the two numbers that we found. This is a positive 5, so that means in the first parentheses I have a plus 5. This is a positive 4, which means I'm going to use plus 4. Now, I can check this on Desmos. And by checking on Desmos, I'm going to type my answer in, but I'm also going to use x's when I type it in. So I'm going to have x plus 5 times x plus 4. And as you can see, the graphs match perfectly. Therefore, my answer is n plus 5 times n plus 4. All right, on my next example, I'm going to find the GCF. I have 1w squared plus 9w plus 18. And when I type into Desmos the GCF of 1, 9, and 18, it tells me that it is 1. I look at my variables. I have w squared, w to the first, and none. Therefore, there are none in the GCF. When my GCF is 1, I do not have to divide. So now I'm going to type this equation in. I cannot type it in as w squared, so I have to use x's. And I find my x-intercepts. Okay, my x-intercepts are at -3 and -6. So I get x is equal to -3 and -6. I do the opposite of those numbers. The opposite is 3 and 6. And those are the two numbers that I'm going to use to factor. So I have 3 times 6 is 18. That is true. 3 plus 6 is 9. That is true. So when I factor this trinomial, my answer is going to be 2 parentheses. Because it is w squared, I know I have w times w, and I'm going to use the two terms that I found. I had a positive 3 and a positive 6. All right, this one is a little bit different. It has a minus sign in it. We're going to treat it exactly the same way. First thing we're going to do on Desmos is to find the GCF. The GCF of 1, 3, and 18 is 1. I compare the variables. I have n to the second, n to the first, and none. Therefore, none go in my GCF. Okay, I type in my equation, my trinomial. I have to make sure I type it in using x's, and I find the x-intercepts. I find that x is equal to -6 and positive 3. So I do the opposite of those numbers, and the opposite is going to be positive 6 and -3. So that tells me when I'm factoring and I'm looking for the two numbers that I multiply to give me -18, and I add to give me that second number 3, it is going to be 6 and -3. All right, and that does work. Once I find the two numbers, I'm ready to factor. It is an n squared, so my first term is going to be n times n. My terms in the parentheses, I have a positive 6, So it's going to be a plus 6. And I have a negative 3. Therefore, that is minus 3. All right, just like before, we find the GCF. The trinomial has the numbers, the coefficients 1, 7, and 30. The GCF of the numbers is 1. I compare the variables. I have x squared, x to the first, and none. Therefore, none go in the GCF, and my answer would just be the GCF is 1. At this point, I type in my trinomial, x squared minus 7x minus 30, and I find my two x-intercepts. I find that x is equal to negative 3 and positive 10. Therefore, to get my two numbers, I'm going to do the opposite of those. And the opposites are positive 3 and negative 10. So I'm taking this trinomial. I want to know what two numbers multiplied together equal negative 30. But when I add them, equal negative 7. And my best friend Desmos gave me those two numbers. I have a positive 3 and I have a negative 10. And if we type that into Desmos, we would see that 3 times negative 10 is negative 30. 3 plus negative 10 is negative 7. So once I find the two numbers, I'm ready to write my answer. It's x squared, therefore that is x times x. And I used the two numbers that were the opposite. I had positive 3 and negative 10. All right, my second equation I have on the calculator typed in to find the GCF of the numbers. My numbers are 1, 12, and 64. Notice I don't put any negatives there because the GCF is going to give you a positive number. If you did type the negatives, the answer is still going to be 1. And I look at my variables. I have a case to the second. Second term is k to the first. Third term, 64, has no k's. Therefore, there are no k's in my GCF. All right, I type in my trinomial using the variable x. I get x squared minus 12x minus 64. I click on the x-intercepts, and I find that x is equal to negative 4 and positive 16. To get the correct numbers, I must do the opposite of those. And the opposite of those are going to be 4 and negative 16. So when I factor this trinomial, I was looking for the two numbers that multiplied and gave me negative 64. But when I added them, it gave me that middle number, negative 12, those negatives at that point. So the opposite was positive 4 and negative 16, which would be the correct two numbers. 4 plus negative 16 is negative 12. 4 times negative 16 is negative 64. So my answer, two parentheses, to get k squared, I multiply k times k. I'm going to use positive 4 and negative 16. And we do have to include. Right, our next example also has a minus in it. We are finding the GCF on Desmos of 1, 11, 24, and that is equal to 1. We are looking at the variables x squared, x to the first, and none. Therefore, there are no x's in the GCF. So I'm going to type my problem. and I am going to find what two numbers multiplied together is equal to positive 24, but when added together is equal to negative 11. So I'm using Desmos to help me find those. You can see that we have the x-intercepts when it's typed in of actually 30 and 80. So I know x is equal to 3 and 8. But in order to get the correct two numbers, I have to do the opposite. And the opposite of those numbers are negative 3 and negative 8. So the two numbers that I'm going to use to factor are negative 3 and negative 8. And my answer is going to be factored as two parentheses. To get x squared, it is x times x. I'm using negative 3 and negative 8. So my answer, x minus 3 times x minus 8. All right, next example, we have y to the second minus 17y plus 72. I found the GCF of 1, 17, and 72 on Desmos, which is 1. I have y squared, y to the first, and no y's. Therefore, there are no y's in the GCF. I typed in my trinomial. I have to use x, and I find that the x-intercepts are positive 9 and positive 8. To get the two numbers that I'm looking for, I'm going to do the opposite of those two, and the opposite is negative 9 and negative 8. So my trinomial, y to the second minus 17y plus 72. What two numbers multiplied equals 72, but when I add them, 18. And I'm going to get negative 9 and negative 8. Therefore, my answer, two parentheses, to get y squared is y times y. It's negative 9 and negative 8. Equals negative 7. All right, this one looks a little bit different. Instead of just an a squared, a 1 in front of a squared, there is a 2. So when I did my GCF, I found that the GCF was 2. Just like before, we have to make sure that we divide each term by the GCF. Okay, so that means I'm going to divide by 2. My GCF is always going to come first outside the parentheses, and I'm going to have a squared plus 10a plus 24. At this point, this is where we find the x-intercepts. Okay, I type in the original problem. Very important that we do that using the variable x. And I find that my x-intercepts are negative 6 and negative 4. Therefore, when I do the opposite of those, I'm going to get positive 6 and positive 4. So that means that when I found the two numbers that multiplied together to equal 24 and added together to equal 10, those numbers are 6 and 4. Therefore, I'm now ready to factor. I bring down this GCF, and my answer is going to be two parentheses. A squared means I would have an a times an a. First terms are a. I'm using positive 6 and positive 4. So this is one that has a GCF, and we have to do that GCF first. All right, last example that I'm going to do, we have the trinomial 3x squared minus 6x minus 24. When I type into Desmos to find the GCF of 3, 6, and 24, it is 3. Therefore, I must divide each term by 3. My GCF goes in front. And when I divide, those cancel out, leaving x squared. 6 divided by 3 is 2, and I bring down the x. And 24 divided by 3 is 8. Okay, on Desmos, I typed in my equation. I found the x-intercept, which was negative 2 and positive 4. I do the opposite of those, which is going to be positive 2 and negative 4. Therefore, my answer is going to be 2 binomials. To get x squared, x times x, I have positive 2 and negative 4. Okay, there are 2 more problems, and I'd like for you to try those 2 problems. And if you don't care, work them out on a sheet of paper and send me a picture or a screenshot or a snip or whatever you want to do on those 2 problems to my email. Sorry guys, I couldn't be here today, but as I said, I am in person testing. See you next week. Bye-bye.